The waiver wire might be the most important part of this fantasy season right now as we continue to lose players to injury, star players at that. The need for depth and replacement options is so crucial to survive the fantasy season right now. I'm John Macri, joined as always by PFF's lead fantasy analyst, Nathan Jahnke. And for this episode of the PFF Fantasy Podcast, we'll be going over all of the top available waiver wire targets heading into week 7. Nate, I don't know about you. I'm getting pretty sick of the injuries already this season. That's the PG version of it from me, but been a brutal year for injuries so far.
Yeah, lots of injuries. Hopefully, a lot of the ones that happened this week aren't long term. Hopefully, players are just out for a week or two, but it does make for a pretty interesting list of players on the waiver wire this week, especially at wide receiver. You have a lot of names to go over, but it was an interesting situation at running back with some of the guys that have been injured recently. And then tight ends, more and more of the young tight ends keep emerging as having good games. So, a couple interesting tight end options, too.
Yeah, should be a fun one. At least, as fun as, talking about replacement players for injuries and stuff like that can go. But definitely some nice movement there at the running back position. So, yeah, things are always changing here. And yeah, new lead backs are emerging. And look, like you said, rookie tight ends as well, earning their spots. So we're going to go into it. We're going to talk about all the lead waiver wire targets here heading into week 7. But yeah, if you want the written version of the waiver wire article, obviously you can access that on pff.com right now. Nate has updated that through the Monday Night Football games. Get access to that with a PFF Plus subscription, and also be sure to use the promo code PFF Fantasy Podcast 25 to get 25% off a PFF Plus subscription. That'll get you access to all of the fantasy rankings as well, all the articles, tools, PFF grades as well for every player on every team. Again, just use the promo code PFF Fantasy Podcast 25 to get 25% off. And then, otherwise, in general, if you want to help support the channel, please don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the hype button on the YouTube mobile as well. We greatly appreciate that. Helps a small channel like ours grow a little bit more. And hopefully we could do some more stuff for you guys as well as the season goes on and in through the off season as well to help you out. So with all that said, Nate, we'll get into our waiver wire targets as usual. We'll start at the quarterback position like we always do. And kicking us off here right at the top has been, as has been the case for several weeks now, a supporting star on Thursday night to the main character in New York right now, Cam Skedaboo. It's Jackson Dart, of course, who once again hovered around a 200-yard passing mark, gave us another 50-plus rushing yards and a score on the ground. Nate, might not be on this list much longer as that roster ship slowly grows here.
Yeah, I'd expect that to keep growing because he has consistently been involved in the run game, getting 50 yards after 50 yards after 50 yards, and that just helps someone's fantasy performance. So if you're looking at his fantasy points per start, he is right up there with a lot of fantasy starters. If you're looking at it, fantasy points per game, obviously he's hurt a lot from the games where he was a backup, so you definitely want to look at fantasy points per start when you're considering Dart, but the schedule has been decent. Dart generally has good matchups going forward. Not the worst option in week 7. He's going up against the Denver Broncos. Not the best opponent you want to be facing if you're looking for a quarterback specifically for this week. If you just need that bye-week replacement for Josh Allen, maybe looking elsewhere or Lamar Jackson, but Jackson's also been hurt, so you hopefully already have a backup option if you've had Lamar Jackson. But I think Dart can still play well against the Denver Broncos. These quarterbacks who are good at running the ball, their opponent doesn't matter as much as other quarterbacks. So I'm not as concerned about the matchup with Dart as I am with other quarterbacks. So even if you are looking for that week 7 replacement, Dart could be an option, but I really want him for the long term. I think he can be in your fantasy starting lineup for several weeks going forward.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, he's been, like you said, like a fringe top 12 starter ever since taking over that starting job. He gave us a bit of a scare there on Thursday Night Football to get checked for the concussion, came back in though, saved the day. They beat the Eagles. Who would have thought, the vibes of New York and Philadelphia would be like so polar opposite right now, even though the Eagles are 4-2, the Giants are 2-4. But yeah, Dart he's a big reason for that excitement. And for fantasy purposes, at the very least, we should be excited as well here. And then meanwhile, we had a young up-and-coming quarterback here to top our list this week. The next name is a grizzled old vet who recently changed teams and did so pretty much right after we recorded last week, Nate. But you were able to get in there and add a quick edit, so that was nice. But let's talk about the Bengals' new quarterback, Joe Flacco, who will face off against the Steelers on Thursday Night Football this week.
Yes, the Bengals quarterback has been on this list for a while, whichever quarterback it was, because the schedule for the Bengals is so nice over the rest of the season for offensive success. Flacco looked fairly good. It wasn't in a winning effort, but he still got the ball to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, which is all you hope for a Bengals quarterback for fantasy purposes. So had a decent enough game, and it was against a Packers defense, which has been relatively average against quarterbacks so far, but the Bengals, they play the Pittsburgh Steelers this week. Pittsburgh allowed the fourth most fantasy points to quarterbacks over the first 5 weeks of the season. And Cincinnati has four other opponents over the rest of the year that's in the top 8 at allowing fantasy points to quarterbacks. Three of their following 5 games are against teams in the top 3 at allowing fantasy points to quarterbacks. So it's all either excellent matchups or good to average matchups for the Bengals going forward. So I think Flacco, especially when you expect the Bengals to be playing from behind in a lot of these games, needing to throw a lot in these games against teams that are allowing a lot of points to quarterbacks, Flacco could very well be a top 12 fantasy quarterback over the rest of the year and someone that you can put in your starting lineup when he's facing one of those top 3 or 4 teams that allow points to fantasy quarterbacks.
Yeah, like you said, he didn't look bad, right? Like, of course, he wasn't Joe Burrow, but he was better than Jake Browning, at least. 200 plus yards, and he actually threw the ball to his star wide receivers, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, combined for like 20 targets on the day, as it should be. And that wasn't even the case right out the gate, but Flacco did at least figure it out before the game was done. So nice to see. And yeah, literally, like for all the same reasons that we had Browning on here, Flacco definitely deserving as well. So yeah, right now, hopefully he could survive behind that offensive line. He was sacked like 6 times or something this week, so I don't love that. But for now, he is a decent option here. And then last quarterback on the list, Nate, a favorite of yours, Trevor Lawrence of the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yeah, this Jaguars passing offense has started to look better and better these past couple weeks, so that's been good to see. Lawrence has been among the top fantasy quarterbacks over the past 2 weeks. Has thrown for at least 220 yards in 4 of his last 5 games. Has scored 5 touchdowns over the past 2 weeks. So this passing offense is looking better. The only downside is the Jaguars have one of the worst schedules for fantasy quarterbacks over the rest of the season. But we only have 2 teams on bye weeks this upcoming week. But after that, we have 6 teams on a bye week, then 4, then 4. So these next couple weeks are going to be pretty brutal with bye weeks. So I would start planning ahead now, figure out what positions you need potentially 2 weeks in advance, 3 weeks in advance. And if you need a quarterback, figure out which quarterback you might need that week. And there's a chance Lawrence will be the top option, just depending on which week you need a fantasy quarterback.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, he's been playing better recently. He's strung together a couple decent games in a row now. And at least from a grading perspective as well, right? Because the first 4 games of the season, he had a passing grade below 65 in each, and then combined for like 7 turnover worthy plays with 0 big time throws. These last 2 games against good defenses as well, Kansas City and Seattle, like the passing grade has been above 70, just the 1 turnover worthy play and 3 big time throws. So improvement and consistency is what we want to see. Also, that helped BTJ increase his fantasy production each week as well, which we certainly care about quite a bit. And then hopefully Travis Hunter is next, but we'll see there. But yeah, like nice to see some improvement there from Trevor Lawrence as well. Before we go on to the running backs, I want to let everybody know that this episode is brought to you by Fabric by Gerber Life. Parenting is filled with high pressure decisions, and it can be difficult to tell if we've made the right choice for our kids' future. But here's a simple decision you can make today that could make a meaningful impact on your kids' future. Opening a UGMA kids investment account with Fabric to start their investment journey early and give them a financial head start. Fabric by Gerber Life was designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With a kids investment account from Fabric, you can start investing in your child's future today. It's all online, and setting up an account could take you just 5 minutes. Get started investing with as little as $1 a day, then manage your child's account and monitor their investments right from your phone. There are no contribution limits, multiple tax advantages, and they're SIPC insured up to $500,000, plus no commission fees and just a low flat monthly maintenance fee. Fabric has partnered with Gerber Life, trusted by millions of families like yours for over 50 years. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their families. Start investing in your child today at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. That's meetfabric.com/PFFNFL, meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. Portfolios managed by Fort Washington Investment Advisors, Inc. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Learn more at meetfabric.com. Okay, on to some of the more exciting options now at the running back position here, and ones that should get a lot of attention on waiver wires this week, Nate. This is is led by Kamani Vidal of the Los Angeles Chargers right now.
Yeah, we thought it was going to be Hassan Haskins getting the start last week. There were reports even before the game that Haskins would get the start. Vidal got the start, and they used both of the running backs decently on the first two drives. Neither one was having much success, and then Vidal broke a 38-yard run early on the third drive, so the team started leaning more and more on Vidal over the rest of the game. So it wasn't surprising that whichever running back got the hot hand ended up being the main running back over the rest of the game. It was a little surprising to me to see Vidal start over Haskins, but they did both get their opportunities early in the game. I think Vidal is going to be the top running back, at least for this upcoming week, and could be the top running back for a little bit now. It sounds like Hampton is going to miss more than the 4 games that is minimally required for injured reserve. But there is a chance that Haskins gets a hot hand next week and Haskins ends up being the primary running back over the rest of the game, even though I expect Vidal to start. There were also reports that the Chargers were looking to trade for a running back, which on one hand speaks to the fact that Hampton is probably going to miss some pretty significant time, but also the Vidal played well enough that he may have kept the job, but he also maybe didn't. And the Chargers trade for a running back, and Vidal ends up being a backup again. So I would definitely prioritize him on the waiver wire, especially if you need a running back this week. Just know that it is pretty risky if he ends up working out this week, if he ends up working out for the next month, maybe it works out for 2 months. It's pretty up in the air of how well this will work out. But Vidal is the top option because there's a chance he is a fantasy starter over these next 2 months of the season.
Yeah, and like you said, he played well, right? 124 rushing yards, added on like 18 carries, adds the receiving touchdown. And we also knew like this matchup was great going against the Dolphins' run defense. We just didn't know that it would be necessarily Vidal that would dominate the backfield touches, even if that wasn't impossible. But it looks at least that he's kind of the favorite right now, and he's available in about 3/4 of leagues. So go get some, because it does not sound like Omarion Hampton is coming back anytime soon. But like you said, there's always the trade possibility, but we'll see on that front here. We'll see who's available. But another instance of injured starters and what was an ambiguous backfield at this time last week, pretty much, right? In Arizona, it seemed like Michael Carter would lead the way, but then Adam Schefter reporting before the game this week that Bam Knight was set to get the start, and he did, even getting a touchdown this week. So Knight is the top option in Arizona for now.
The funny part is Knight didn't actually start. It was
Yeah.
Carter who started and got most of the carries over the very start of the game. Then Knight scored a touchdown pretty much immediately once he started playing. And then Knight ended up with more of the early down snaps, more of the short yardage situations and goal line situations, especially, which was pretty big. Carter ended up playing more of the passing down work because Amari DiMercato suffered an injury pretty early on in this game. So we saw basically in the preseason, in the second half of games, it was Carter and Knight and DiMercato getting rotated in and out for each other as the team was trying to figure out which running back was going to make the roster and which ones would make the practice squad. So it's not surprising that these running backs are really close together in terms of what the Cardinals think of the running backs. I would expect Knight to be the primary guy over the short term for Arizona. The fact that he was especially used in goal line and short yardage situations is good to see from a fantasy perspective, because it likely means he will be the one scoring the touchdowns going forward. Took 8 of the possible 9 snaps in those situations this past week. I expect a 2-man rotation this upcoming week, and it's an okay schedule. It's not the best, and Arizona also has their bye week in there, but they do face the Dallas Cowboys after the bye week. So I do want whichever running back, especially for that week. I'm just not sure if whichever Cardinals running back ends up starting will be in your fantasy starting lineup this week or not.
Yeah, at the very least, right? He's an option if you are, hurt by injuries and bye weeks as the weeks go on here. Available in 95% of leagues is obviously really nice. That's going to shoot up here a ton, obviously. Trey Benson eventually coming back as well will change that. But he's out at least another couple games. So Bam Knight, Michael Carter, definitely going to be options for us. But Knight obviously is the hot name right now this week that we should be taking a look at. One player who has been on the list here for a few weeks now is Kendre Miller of the New Orleans Saints. He didn't outcarry Alvin Kamara this week like he did the week before, but this is a 1 in 5 team that could eventually look to even trade Kamara at some point. We'll see. But Kendre Miller on the list and available in about 3/4 of the league, Snake.
Yeah, while Kamara still ended up leading the team in carries, it was pretty close between the two. It's basically even over these past 2 weeks with Miller getting a little bit more rushing yards. Miller was interestingly used at the goal line as well as short yardage situations this past week, so that was good to see. A chance that Miller will score some more touchdowns going forward, where Kamara was a clear third down, 2 minute drill back. So I think there's a number of scenarios that could work out in New Orleans and a couple of ways where it makes sense to pick up Miller. First off, when we get to these bye weeks, you might get desperate for a running back, and Miller could be the best option because he is pretty consistently the top running back out of all the running backs available on the waiver wire that isn't part of these injury situations. He's just the one that, if you're in a deeper league and you need to throw a running back in your starting lineup, he's not going to be the ideal option, but he is still better than all the other backup options out there that are available on the waiver wire. So short term, if you need a running back, that's there. As you mentioned, there's a chance Kamara could get traded, in which case Miller would be the lead running back going forward, which is the best case scenario for Miller. But there's also just a scenario where they keep Kamara because he's been on the team throughout his career and they want to keep him, but Miller gets more and more of that early down work and Kamara becomes more and more of a third down back and 2 minute drill back. We could see that 50-50 split in which Miller is the better fantasy option going forward. So I think that is also a pretty plausible scenario as we get further and further along into the season. So Miller is both that good short-term option, but I think out of all of the other backups in the league that you want to roster right now, I think Miller has the best chance of potentially earning that starting job without an injury happening to a running back in the backfield.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and who knows with the trade, right? Like I understand, Alvin Kamara trade. Maybe it's unlikely because we can't have any fun with it. It's not Madden and blah blah blah. But it just makes sense, right? Like if you're the Saints, what reason do you have to cling on to Kamara at this point in his career? Like especially where the team is in the standings, get some return for him while you can. Maybe maybe that nukes our Kamani Vidal or maybe the Chiefs since their running backs have been rough. I don't know, whatever. Anyways, there's some options there for a Kendre Miller path to start. But we also have Tajay Spears on the list here, Nate, of the Tennessee Titans. He took down he took on the passing down duties once again here in his second week back for Tennessee.
Yeah, this game looked very much like a game from last season where Spears dominated snaps on third downs and 2 minute drill situations. Also took some of the early down snaps where Pollard took the majority of the early down snaps. So that was very reminiscent of a lot of games last year when both running backs were healthy. But we did see late last season Spears get more work in the run game. There were reports at the beginning of the season that Spears might get more involved in the run game before his injury happened. So I wouldn't be surprised if Spears continues to see his playing time grow and gets to at least 50-50 with Tony Pollard in terms of their early down snaps. I could see that being possible. The Titans just fired their head coach, so there's always a chance that Tennessee could make some changes to their offense in general, which makes all of the players on their team a little bit more interesting from a waiver wire perspective because we don't know how that coaching change will shift things. I've also seen some beat reporters think Tony Pollard might be available for trade. There are some teams that could need a running back. Pollard could be a better option for some other teams, and then that would give Spears the opportunity to be a starter. So, especially with these next couple weeks when we're getting closer and closer to the NFL trade deadline, which I believe is right at the start of November, I think Pollard is someone who could get traded, in which case Spears is the clear lead running back for Tennessee over the rest of the season. So I would get Spears both for the chance that he breaks even with Pollard in the run game while also keeping his receiving work, but also for that scenario where Pollard ends up getting traded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely possible as well, right? And like you said, like Spears, he's not going to get the most of the opportunities, when the team is trailing. But like honestly, how do we expect the team to not be trailing at this point? We'll see how much a coaching staff changes that. But yeah, I mean, he just had the 4 catches for 19 yards this week, but like that can work in deeper leagues, especially on those crazy bye weeks. And like you said, maybe he does get more carries as the season goes on as well. Right now, it's hard to believe too much in anyone on this Titans offense, but there's bound to be someone who emerges, and it's worth taking these kind of low cost shots on these guys who are widely available on the chance that they hit big here. And then, like you said, who knows with the coaching staff change, if that shakes things up a little bit, maybe a trade. All these kinds of things are options on the table here for the Tennessee Titans, and Tajay Spears could be a beneficiary of that. So I do like that one. Next up, some deeper league options, Nate, and kicking us off is Isaiah Davis with the New York Jets.
Oh, yeah. Davis has been the clear number two running back with Braylon Allen on injured reserve, expected to miss most, if not all, of the rest of the season. He's expected to get back a little bit later in the season, potentially. But right now, Davis is the clear number two running back. No one else is seeing playing time in the Jets offense outside of him and Brees Hall at running back. Hall, the clear number one option. Davis playing on third downs and then just a couple snaps here and there in other situations. But this is really for if Brees Hall ends up getting traded or if he ends up getting injured. But the Jets haven't won a game yet. Hall is in the last year of his contract. It doesn't sound like he wants to get traded, but if the Jets are starting to look ahead to the next year and decide that they don't want to sign Hall to a long-term contract, then it makes sense to trade him, get a draft pick for him sooner rather than later. So I could see them trading Hall, even though he has basically been their offense. But if they don't want to pay him long-term, then the best option is to trade him, in which case Davis would be the lead running back for the Jets going forward in an offense that likes to run the ball. So Davis would see a ton of volume in that scenario. I would say it's less than a 50% chance that Hall gets traded, but it's worth holding on to Davis for these couple weeks just in case Hall does, because then you get a potentially fantasy starting running back over the rest of the season.
For sure. Yeah. And yeah, we keep mentioning trades. I should mention that. Yeah, I think the NFL trade deadline comes right after week 9, right? So I wish it would be a little bit later, right? Because there's so many injuries and teams could, make a little bit more movement. But yeah, a few more weeks at least of some trade speculation. And yeah, these guys are definitely options here. But for even deeper leagues, Keaton Mitchell was at least active again this week, but didn't get any touches. However, that's not kind of the value that we're looking for. He's purely a Derrick Henry handcuff if something were to happen there.
Oh, yeah. At this point, these last couple options are all just handcuffs, just in case the starter gets injured. Mitchell and the Ravens have one of the best schedules for running backs over the rest of the season, which is also good news for Derrick Henry in general, which was good to see him bounce back this past week. But I think Mitchell would be the clear lead running back if Henry were to get injured. I think Mitchell could be a fantasy starter. He has played very well whenever given the opportunities. He's just not Derrick Henry, and I'm not going to fault him for not being Derrick Henry and not getting many touches with Henry being healthy, but I think Mitchell could be a clear weekly fantasy starter if Henry were to suffer an injury.
Yeah. And then the same kind of idea with the rookie Bengals running back, Taj Brooks, right, Nate?
Oh, yep. I've talked about him pretty much every week because Chase Brown still hasn't looked the greatest at running back. A chance that they make a change. There's been no indication at this point that they will because they're not getting Brooks involved in the run game at all, where it would be nice to see Brooks involved at least a little bit. But again, the Bengals have one of the most favorable schedules for the offense in general, but also for running backs, especially in the fantasy playoffs. So Brooks, I think, is worth taking a chance on just in case he ends up being the starter because he could have a big rest of the season if that happens.
For sure. And then you got one more handcuff option here, Dylan Sampson with the Cleveland Browns.
Oh, yeah. Sampson has been taking some snaps from Jerome Ford on early downs recently, so it's been more clear that Sampson would be the handcuff to Quinshon Judkins, so that's been good to see. Judkins still is potentially getting investigated by the NFL. There hasn't really been any report on that over the past month or so since Judkins met with the NFL. So there's a little bit more chance that Sampson could see some value this season than the typical handcuff because there's at least a chance Judkins gets suspended at some point this season. I don't think that's a likely scenario, but I think it's at least possible. And the Browns are another team that has one of the best schedules for fantasy running backs over the rest of the season. I included Judkins as a player to buy low on this week because Judkins had a subpar game this past week, but I think Judkins can have a big rest of the season as long as he's healthy and not suspended. But I think whichever running back is playing for Cleveland would play well. So if Judkins does get injured or suspended, then Sampson would be the guy you want in this backfield.
Okay, and before we go on to the wide receivers, I also want to let you know that this episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. October 10th was World Mental Health Day, but we're celebrating all of October here and taking the time to say thank you to our therapists. BetterHelp therapists have helped over 5 million people worldwide on their mental health journeys. That's millions of stories, millions of journeys, and behind everyone is a therapist who showed up, listened, and helped someone take a step forward. Moments in therapy, like the right question, a safe space to cry, or a small win, can change lives. This World Mental Health Day, BetterHelp is honoring those connections and the therapists who make them possible while showing how easy it is to get guidance from a licensed therapist online with BetterHelp. BetterHelp does the initial matching for you so you can focus on your therapy goals. A short questionnaire helps identify your needs and preferences, and our 10 plus years of experience and industry leading match fulfillment rate means we typically get it right the first time. If you aren't happy with your match, switch to a different therapist at any time from our tailored recommendations. This World Mental Health Day, we're celebrating the therapists who have helped millions of people take a step forward. If you're ready to find the right therapist for you, BetterHelp can help you start the journey. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/PFF. That's betterhelp.com/PFF. All right, Nate. A little shakeup at the top of the wide receiver names available on our waiver wire target list this week, and that shake comes from the Booty, Kayshon Boutte, at the top of this list after a huge game in Week 6 with 93 receiving yards and 2 touchdown receptions. So, is this something we can trust going forward? Do you think?
I think he'll be a little bit inconsistent. He'll have some good games and bad games, but this Patriots offense has looked pretty good recently, so there should be more good games than bad. His role has been fairly consistent throughout the season as the Patriots' X receiver. They still rotate a little bit more at wide receiver than most teams, even at the top. So he's been playing roughly 70% of snaps in 2 wide receiver sets, 80% of snaps in 3 wide receiver sets. So that's something we can live with. Stephon Diggs has been rotating in, Mac Hollins, Demario Douglas, someone else who had a good game this week, but with Douglas, he scored a touchdown on one big play. Hasn't had a ton of targets outside of that this season. He's been rotating. Typically, a wide receiver only playing in 3 wide receiver sets is pretty risky in fantasy, but for him, he's been rotating a lot in 3 wide receiver sets with Stephon Diggs also seeing a lot of snaps in the slot. So even though Douglas also had a good game, he is someone I would leave on the waiver wire. I think Kayshon is someone who can be the Patriots' top receiver going forward. I think it'll probably be some combination of him and Diggs and Hunter Henry. Ideally, 2 of those 3 have good weeks every week. It'll just change which ones of the 2 have the good weeks and which one has the bad weeks. So I think you'll be happy more often than not with Kayshon going forward. So I would pick him up, and I think especially with these bye weeks heading, he can be someone that can be, in particular, a bye week fill-in.
Yeah, and look, we did this with the Patriots last year, right? You're hoping that somebody's going to emerge here with as a consistent option for this receiving core. And Stephon Diggs, he's been fine, but also on the older side and not as consistent himself so far this year, coming off that ACL. But maybe it's Booty, so we'll have to see, in the weeks ahead. But obviously, after a big game in Week 6, pretty hard to ignore in terms of potential betting favorites for the rest of the season. He looked pretty decent here. So, like you said, if there's we could use him more weeks than not, that's kind of what we're looking for with this Patriots receiving core. And then Nate, speaking of guys who are hard to ignore, Kendrick Bourne has gone off over the past couple of games. And sure, there are a ton of injuries to take into consideration with this 49ers receiving core. I mean, the whole team really, but specifically for Bourne as a pass catcher in this offense, injuries have opened things up for him, and he's made the most of his opportunities.
Yeah, he's been excellent from a fantasy perspective these past 2 weeks. A lot of reasons for that, but one of those reasons is he is just playing very well. So even though there's a lot of negatives for why this might not continue, he's just playing well. So there's a chance he continues to play well. So I'd consider him because of that. Some of those reasons to be a little more pessimistic rather than his stat total is he has been catching passes from Mac Jones, which he does have 3 years of experience with the Patriots. So their connection has a lot more chemistry than the connection with the other 49ers receivers. George Kittle is hopefully going to be back this week. A little less optimistic about some of the other players. Ricky Pearsall, not sure when he's going to be back. Juwan Jennings was back this week, but he said after the game he's been dealing with several different injuries that it's surprising that he's even playing through them, but clearly not as effective playing with those injuries. And then a chance that Brock Purdy comes back sooner rather than later. Purdy and Bourne probably won't have the same connection because they don't have 3 years of experience with the Patriots. So a lot of reasons why Bourne might not be the best long-term option at wide receiver, but there is a chance that a lot of these players remain injured, at least for the short term, in which case Bourne could very well continue being one of the top fantasy wide receivers in the NFL. Faced the Atlanta Falcons this week. The Falcons have generally played well against wide receivers, but it is a short week for them. They just played on Monday Night Football last night, so a chance that Bourne might fare a little bit better than some other wide receivers have against them.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the numbers, like he's like a PPR wide receiver 4 over the past 2 weeks. He's been on fire, and obviously a key contributor for this offense for the time being. Nearly 300 receiving yards over the last 2 games and 2 touchdowns to show for it. So yeah, Kendrick Bourne definitely playing well. All right, we talked a little bit about Brian Callahan, getting fired earlier for the Titans. Maybe the offense changes in favor of the passing game right now because, it's been hard to believe too much in this offense as a whole, Nate. But we also saw Calvin Ridley pick up a hamstring injury, so maybe there's more opportunity here to go around for Alec Iomanor or Iomanor. Damn it, I keep doing that. Iomanor is the the Titans rookie wide receiver.
Yeah, it was pretty sad to see this past week with Calvin Ridley suffering the injury. Ayumanor or Ayuman or however you say it. He's been the X receiver for the Titans, but after the injury, Van Jefferson became the X receiver, moving Alec to the Z receiver spot, and it's been consistently the X receivers who have played well against the Raiders. So it was Van Jefferson who ended up having the good game. I thought Alec would have the good game, and if Calvin Ridley had stayed healthy, I would have expected Alec to have the good game this week, but it ended up being Van Jefferson. But if Ridley ends up being injured for the long term, I'd expect Alec to slide into that Z receiver role, which is where Calvin Ridley had a lot of success a week ago. I think he'd be the clear top option in the offense as long as Calvin Ridley is injured. So a lot will depend on how serious this injury is for Calvin Ridley. I don't think there's been any really conclusive reports about him. So I'm guessing a chance that Ridley might miss a week or two, in which case Alec could be a good short-term option. And then just in general, if you look at the waiver wire wide receivers, who's been successful over the course of the entire season, he's right near the top of that list. And anytime you can get a wide receiver who is a rookie in the first half of the season, he could blow up over the second half of the season, even though we've seen more and more rookies who are doing well at the start of the rookie season. I don't think that stops the fact that there are going to be rookies who start playing well in the middle of the season or in the later parts of the season. So if you can have one of these rookies on your bench, even though a bunch of bye weeks are coming up, I think it's good to have these rookies take a chance on them because they are the players most likely to see a significant improvement between the first half of the year and the second half of the year.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we talked about Alec Pierce of the Indianapolis Colts before, actually as recently as last week, and we know Daniel Jones likes to utilize him as a kind of go-to deep target. So some high upside potential in Alec Pierce's game right now.
Yeah, I caught 2 passes for 48 yards, so it wasn't the best game, but it was the 5th consecutive game that the Colts ex-receiver had at least 48 receiving yards, so it's been a pretty consistent part of the offense. We know Tyler Warren has played great this season. Michael Pittman has played well over a lot of weeks. Josh Downs just had a good game, but all 3 of those players are all short, average depth of target options, all competing for some of the same targets where Pierce holds that unique spot in the offense of being the deep threat. So I think even though there's a lot of other talented players in Indianapolis, Pierce's role is unique enough that he's going to consistently see some of those targets. We know because he's that deep threat, is capable of having some pretty big games if he catches more of those deep passes. Matchup this week against the Los Angeles Chargers isn't all that favorable. So if you need a wide receiver specifically for this week, I would probably look elsewhere. But if you are looking ahead to bye weeks where we have a lot of teams on bye weeks in week 8 and week 9, 2 favorable matchups against the Tennessee Titans and Pittsburgh Steelers. So could very well be a fantasy starter for you in those matchups when your starting wide receivers have a bye week.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, the other guys in the Colts offense are kind of competing for similar targets, right? And the one real threat to Alex Pierce in his role was, probably AD Mitchell, right? But he's been a healthy scratch here. And yeah, probably the guy that the team expected to be their go-to deep target when they drafted him. That hasn't really worked out, at least consistently just yet. And part of that reason is that Alec Pierce has been really good in that role. So like him in that spot. And then next up, Isaiah Bond, the Cleveland Browns wide receiver, might not have had the most productive game this week, but still on the field quite a bit where those targets are going to start coming as long as that's the case.
Oh, yeah, I've talked about him for a while because, again, you want to take a chance on some of these rookie wide receivers who are seeing playing time in hopes that they work out over the second half of the season. And Bond saw a pretty consistent uprise in playing time over the first couple weeks of the season. Thought he'd see more these past couple weeks with Cedric Tillman out, but it was really this past week where his playing time looked like that of a starting fantasy wide receiver. Played over 80% of the offensive snaps, wasn't rotated out very much, and that was particularly good to see because Cleveland likes to use a lot of two tight end sets, so it's harder for the wide receivers to see a ton of playing time when there's only two of them on the field. But Bond was on the field a lot. Seeing a decent number of targets, just not always perfectly connecting with his quarterback. Hopefully that chemistry improves over time. But I think Bond is someone who could emerge as the top wide receiver in the Browns offense over the second half of the season.
For sure. And then Jalen Coker is up next. We thought, maybe he'd be activated in time for last week's game, but that wasn't the case. So looks like his first time getting on the field will come maybe in week 7, Nate.
Oh, yeah. Unfortunately, did not get to play against the Dallas Cowboys defense, which has been a good thing for a lot of fantasy wide receivers this season. But still think he has the opportunity to be the number 2 wide receiver in this offense, an offense that has at times looked good enough to support 2 fantasy relevant receivers. Just no one else has emerged. So I think Coker, at least last year, was the most talented wide receiver for Carolina. So with T-Mac here, that moves him down to number 2, but I think he has an opportunity to be the number 2 player, not just in talent, but also in terms of targets.
For sure. Yeah. We talked about it, even like his production last year when given the chance and how he was more effective than even last year's first round pick, Xavier Legette. And yeah, I don't know that he'll immediately get back to that form, but we know he's at least capable of it. And the expectation, at least for me, is that he does become, like you said, that consistent team wide receiver 2 option with Tetra McMillan being the top option, of course. All right, Christian Watson is another one of those kind of injured players with the potential to return here shortly and maybe at the exact right time, because with Jaden Reed already on injured reserve, they also lost Dontavian Wicks potentially for some time with an ankle injury, Nate. Christian Watson makes the list this week.
Oh, yeah, the Packers wide receivers have generally been a nightmare for fantasy, but if several of them are injured, then it makes it easier for some of these players to be a little more trusted. And I think Watson could be one of those options. The practice window opened up for him a week ago. It sounded like there was at least a possibility that he was going to be activated for last week. That didn't end up happening, but like you said, with the injuries at wide receiver, there's a chance that he can go right back to being the Z wide receiver. Matthew Golden, who I thought was going to be competing with Watson for snaps. Golden has been playing in the slot more recently. So Golden can be in the slot. Watson can be out wide. Romeo Doubs in the other spot out wide. Watson can be a deep threat for this offense, and he's had some good games in the past. Packers have a fine matchup against the Arizona Cardinals next week. However, they face some teams that are in the top 7 at allowing fantasy points to wide receivers over the rest of the season. So there's some pretty good matchups for these Packers wide receivers the rest of the way. So I don't think Watson is someone you want in your fantasy starting lineup every week, but I do think there are going to be some of these games over these next few weeks where Watson can be in your fantasy starting lineup.
Yeah. And like you said, like one of the big problems with this Packers wide receiver core coming into this year was there was potentially too many mouths to feed, and it was, kind of hard to invest too heavily in one from that group. But now that the group is thinning out because of injury, so aside from Tucker Kraft, obviously, who isn't a wide receiver, maybe one of these other guys can emerge, and maybe Christian Watson can fill that void as his, like you said, practice window is opened up here recently. So hopefully he gets out there for week 7. Some of those other, deeper league options that we're considering, Nate, some similar names as in previous weeks and a couple new names as well. But let's start out with one of the constants that's been on here, that being Luther Burden III of the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, it was an interesting night for Chicago last night in that they just had their bye week a week ago, so that gave them some time to make some adjustments to the offense. We saw Colson Loveland get more involved at tight end. We saw Kyle Monungai get more involved at running back. We didn't really see Luther Burden's playing time increase all that much, but he did catch 4 passes for 51 yards, had the most receiving yards of any wide receiver in this game, most receptions for any Bears wide receiver in this game. So even though he wasn't on the field very often, he was the one having the most success. So potentially that should lead to more playing time in the future. I would have thought this would have been a week this past week where he would have saw more playing time. So a little disappointing he didn't play more, but this is the second game where he's put up some pretty good numbers. So I would think Burden is another player that could get more involved over the rest of the season and one of the more talented wide receivers from this draft class. So ideally, if he plays well enough, he can emerge as that number 2 option in this Bears passing offense.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, like the playing time, obviously, we'd like to see that be on the rise a little bit more. But career high in targets, it was only 4, but still like a positive development considering he wasn't out there a ton. But they're at least trying to get him the ball when he is out there. So hopefully that means more playing time here in the near future. And then one of the newer names on this list, Nate, Jordan Whittington of the Los Angeles Rams, because of course Puka Nacua is now injured as well. This season has been a nightmare so far, but I guess that's what waivers are for. And Whittington can maybe provide us a fraction of what Puka could if he misses any time.
Yeah, not only that, but Tutu Atwell missed this past game with a hamstring injury. Unclear if Atwell will be back this upcoming week, but regardless, it sounds like they're leaning towards Nacua not playing this week, which means Whittington should be the number 2 wide receiver for the Los Angeles Rams facing a Jacksonville Jaguars offense. So Whittington could have a pretty big week this upcoming week. He was playing close to 100% of snaps this past week, first off with Atwell out, but then he was even more consistently on the field once Nacua also went down. Generally, when we're talking about these waiver wire targets, we're going from top to bottom in terms of the people you should prioritize the most to the players that you should prioritize the least. But especially at wide receiver, a lot of it really depends on what you're looking for at wide receiver. If you need a wide receiver specifically for this week, Whittington would be a bit higher on this list because it's a favorable matchup against the Jaguars. I just don't see Whittington having any long-term value once Nakua's back in the lineup, which we expect him to be back. The Rams have a week 8 bye week, so hopefully Nakua's going to be back for week 9. So Whittington only a 1-week option, but a pretty decent 1-week option if you do need a wide receiver this week.
Yep, makes sense. Also, Alan Lazard on the list again did not travel with the Jets to London. Nate, is that trade finally coming?
It's possible. I've seen reports that the Steelers are looking to trade for a wide receiver, which is good to see. The fact that Lazard wasn't playing this week was listed as a personal reason. They ruled him out pretty early in the week. A number of reasons why this could happen. Potentially a family-related issue. So first off, if it is a family issue, we hope everything's okay with Lazard and his family and all that. Sometimes it's a good family-related reason. So hopefully everything's good for that. But there's been a number of times where a team has declared someone out because of a personal reason, because the team intends to trade that player and just don't want that player getting injured. Saw something similar with Ray McLeod last night with Atlanta. He was a surprise inactive for Atlanta. So not sure what's up with him, if that was a disciplinary issue, if the Falcons plan on trading McLeod. So definitely an interesting situation. So similar thing where we've talked about it before. If Lazard ends up getting traded to the Steelers, where he was played with Aaron Rodgers before, was a top 11 fantasy wide receiver over the first 6 weeks of last season. So is able of having a lot of success with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, and especially with Calvin Austin III injured. Luckily, Austin hasn't landed on injury reserve yet, but he did miss this past week after those Steelers had their bye week. So definitely a chance Austin misses more time, in which case Lazard would be the clear number 2 wide receiver for the Steelers.
There you go. And then lastly, because we got another injury to a top wide receiver option, Marvin Harrison Jr. picked up a concussion this week, though hopefully not one to last more than a week here. But Zay Jones filled in for Marvin Harrison Jr. Had a pretty productive game in week 6, at least, Nate.
Yeah, Zay Jones, it's been surprising to me how much playing time he's got these past 2 years, because he is barely averaging a catch per game outside of this past week. And then it was Kyler Murray who was out and Jacoby Brissett was at quarterback. And it's not the first time that we've seen a backup quarterback have success with essentially a backup wide receiver. We're seeing it a ton with San Francisco right now, and we just saw it this past week with Arizona. So I think Zay Jones's success might be tied to Jacoby Brissett also playing at quarterback. So it depends if Kyler Murray is able to play this week or not. But I think if Kyler Murray remains out, we get another week of Brissett. assuming Marvin Harrison also misses a week, which is decently common when someone suffers a concussion, Zay Jones could be the wide receiver tab for Arizona this upcoming week. And I think it could be a game where Arizona needs to pass the ball a decent amount against the Packers. The Packers offense is generally scoring a lot. A pretty average matchup in general, but Arizona has to throw the ball a lot. A decent amount of that volume could be going to Jones.
Yeah, like you said, we'll see who is at quarterback for the Cardinals next week. But yeah, we could probably expect Marvin Harrison Jr. to miss at least one game here. So Zay Jones could be a nice little fill-in option if we need him. Okay, finally, the tight ends wrap us up. A group now led by Cleveland Browns leader in receiving yards this season, rookie Harold Fannin Jr., who now has 3 top 12 weekly finishes to his name across 6 games. Nate, David Njoku has just one, but Njoku's also hurt right now.
Oh yeah, Fannin. We've talked about him plenty on this list before, just depending on if he's in enough leagues where he's available or not. He has been dropped in enough leagues because he's been right at that borderline of being a fantasy starter. Had the good week this past week. His playing time continues to be very strong with or without David Njoku. Njoku is someone who could end up getting traded as well, assuming he's able to come back from injury. But I think Fannin basically been averaging 10 PPR points per game, which is right at the borderline of being a fantasy starting tight end. And we have a ton of bye weeks over these next few weeks. So even if he's not going to be your long-term starter at tight end, he can be your starter in a given week. And there's a chance that he continues to get better and better over the second half of the season because he is a 4th-round rookie tight end. And we do expect those kind of players to improve as the season goes on.
Yeah, and yeah, we obviously praised Fannin a lot around and the NFL draft time, and he never should have fell to the 4th round in my opinion, because that receiving potential is just too good to ignore. And now he's proving all the believers right in him, which we always love to see, but just needed that clearer path, right? And we'll see if Njoku misses time or not, but that path at least might be more open than it's been so far here in year 1 for him. Another rookie tight end who we liked at draft time as well, Oron Gadsden of the Los Angeles Chargers. He too had a really nice game in week 6, and now his path might be a little clearer as well, Nate.
Oh yeah, this has been a strong rookie class at tight end. Will Dissly had missed the past couple weeks at tight end. He came back this week, so I thought if anything, Gadsden would see a decrease in playing time with Dissly back, and instead it was the opposite. They really trusted Gadsden to be their clear receiving tight end throughout the game, often playing in 1 tight end set, sometimes playing in 2 tight end sets. This was a little bit of an interesting week, and that Scott Matlock, their fullback slash defensive lineman, was inactive due to injury. So we saw Tucker Fisk move to fullback a little bit more this week. I could see Fisk playing more tight end and 2 tight end sets going forward, which could lead to a slight decrease in playing time by Gadsden in 2 tight end sets, but he should consistently be on the field in passing situations, which is what's most important for a tight end. Saw a lot of targets this week, so I think Gadsden. We've seen Greg Roman's offenses for several years have a fantasy relevant tight end, and Gadsden looks to be that player going forward. Tyler Conklin only played a couple snaps this week. I would not be at all surprised if he is a healthy and active in some future weeks, or they end up moving on from him or bring him to the practice squad if no one else wants him. But I don't think Conklin is going to be a factor in this tight end room in general going forward.
Yeah, it makes sense for me. And like Gadsden too, like he missed the first 2 games of the year. He made an impact like right away in his first game of the year in like week 3. Was a little bit quieter after that, but now with this kind of playing time having increased to what the season high 75% snap share, I believe it was, like we get maybe more consistent production from him here going forward and available in 99% of leagues. So definitely a name worth looking at on your waiver wire. So Nate, you've also added Tampa Bay tight end Cade Otton to the waiver wire target list this week. Their receivers are dropping like flies. Another brutal blow with Emeka Egbuka now injured. Mike Evans has been injured. Chris Godwin's still not healthy. Jalen McMillan isn't coming back. Otton might be one of the best bets for Baker to throw to next week.
Yeah, Aden probably the best short-term option out of all the tight ends we're talking about today. Just doesn't have that same long-term value. Playing time has never been a problem for Aden. He just played 100% of snaps this past week, so only the second tight end to play 100% of snaps in a game so far this season. The problem with him has always been his target rate. His target rate has always been low because the Buccaneers have had great options at wide receiver. But we did see a 4-game stretch last year from week 7 to 10 where he was the number one overall tight end in fantasy football with 77.3 PPR points over those 4 games. That was in week 7 that both Chris Godwin suffered his season-ending injury. Mike Evans, who had been dealing with injuries heading into the game, didn't play that much in week 7 and ended up missing the next 3 games. So this was a stretch where there was no Mike Evans, there was no Chris Godwin. Amika Kluka was not on the team yet, so Otten was the best passing option in the offense and was very successful from a fantasy perspective. A lot will depend on when these wide receivers for Tampa Bay are able to return. I think Otten would be a great option if none of the wide receivers are able to play this week. Even if one of them is back, we saw Otten play with just one of the wide receivers this past week and caught 5 passes for 51 yards. So if one wide receiver is healthy, I think Otten is still capable of being a fantasy starter. But once we start to see 2 of these wide receivers back, then I probably don't want him in fantasy, and especially once all 3 wide receivers are back.
Gotcha. And then next up is AJ Barner, who he may not have scored 2 touchdowns again like he did the week before, but he did have 71 receiving yards this week, Nate, and continues to find ways to be productive for the Seahawks.
Yeah, the fact that there's a tight end who had 70 yards this week and 2 touchdowns the week before is fourth on the list just speaks to the depth at tight end on the waiver wire this week. With Barner, playing time hasn't really been an issue, even though Seattle has multiple tight ends, has played 79% of snaps this season, which is pretty decent at tight end. The only problem is Seattle isn't passing the ball a lot. They're near the very bottom of the league in terms of passing attempts per game, which hurts Barner's volume, but Barner has graded very well at tight end, has been the highest graded receiving tight end for us this season in terms of PFF grades, so he's been playing well. I think the ideal case is that leads to a higher target rate from Barner going forward because I don't see Seattle turning to a more pass heavy offense. I think they'll stay as a run heavy offense, which will continue to limit Barner's total number of routes run. And then there's also the risk that Elijah Arroyo, who is seeing some playing time on third down specifically, which is when it's most important for a fantasy tight end to be on the field. A chance Arroyo gets more playing time as the season progresses, even with Barner playing well. So that risk is a big reason why Barner is lower on the list, where I expect the other rookie tight ends we talked about to continue to see a high playing rate throughout the rest of the season.
Yeah. That's fair. Yeah. And yeah, like you said, the Seattle Seahawks offense, pretty run heavy here, right? But even like their willingness to use him in the red zone as well has been pretty nice, right? So when they are willing to pass in those high value areas of the field, Barner has obviously been a pretty big contributor there. So could still be valuable here for fantasy purposes going forward. We also have Isaiah Likely. He's been back for a couple weeks, hasn't been as productive as we'd like to see from him just yet, but heading into a bye week, maybe he gets a little bump in week 8 and rest of season, Nate.
Yeah, I can forgive that production with Lamar Jackson not playing, so that'll be a big part of it. But we did see the Ravens use a ton of 2 tight end sets this week and a ton of 2 tight end sets specifically with Andrews and Likely on the field together. Likely played more than 75% of snaps, which is something he only did once all of last season. Saw more snaps in this game than he saw in any game last season. And also a chance with the Ravens at their record, Mark Andrews in the last year of his contract. I think there's an increasingly likely chance that Andrews gets traded. The only problem is I can't find a lot of teams that are in need of a tight end right now. So I'm not sure if they're going to find a trade partner that they like compared to just keeping him, but a chance that likely becomes the top tight end in this offense going forward. Once Lamar Jackson comes back, then there's a chance that likely plays a lot better with Jackson at quarterback. So Ravens are a team with a bye week this week. You don't want him if you're looking for a tight end specifically for this week, but I think he is a pretty intriguing long-term option. While I think a lot of the other tight ends on this list have a better chance of being a top 10 fantasy tight end over the rest of the season, likely might have the best chance of the group of being a top 5 fantasy tight end over the rest of the season or a top 3 option, just because we know how talented he is. And if the situation is right and Lamar Jackson is playing at an MVP level and likely he's getting the receiving snaps at tight end, that could be an excellent situation for him.
For sure. Yeah. And Mark Andrews, like outside of the 1 week, he just really hasn't been much of a factor himself. Right. So the team needs help right now. They're 1-5. Lamar is expected back post bye week. Roquan Smith as well. Like likely being more of a factor. That could be huge for them if they're going to turn this thing around. And maybe he just needs that little time to get back up to speed and health and get Lamar healthy as well. So, all right, guess who's back and finding ways to be productive, different ways to be productive every week, Nate, for fantasy purposes. It's Taysom Hill, who scored a rushing touchdown this week.
Yeah, it was his only touch in the game, so scoring a touchdown on 100% of his touches. Ideally, would be on the field more often. He saw a slight increase in snaps. It was interesting that they changed how they used him a bit this game. In his first game back, he was seeing most of his snaps at quarterback. This week, it was a lot of snaps basically in a fallback-like position. So changing how they're using him, which I guess is good to see in that they are willing to use him in a lot of different ways. Also had more snaps as a receiver this week. So I think we could continue to see his role in this offense increase going forward. And if they like using him in the red zone like they did this past week, a chance that he scores a lot of touchdowns over the rest of the season. So a very risky option at tight end, but someone that could pay off in a major way. Was in the top 6 in terms of fantasy points per game for a tight end last season, which a lot of that was concentrated in a couple of games and a couple of other games where he barely did anything. But if you're willing to take a chance on him at tight end, his upside is through the roof because he has a chance of scoring multiple touchdowns in any given game and a probably higher chance of scoring multiple touchdowns than basically any other tight end in the NFL.
Yeah, it's always going to be hard to predict his usage and his production week to week. Like, we know that it's almost always impossible to figure out exactly where he'll get his touches, but that's kind of part of the appeal with him, right? For that high upside, because it could come in so many different ways. And it's not just rare for the tight end position, but all positions in the NFL. He's just a unique talent that can deliver in so many different ways. So yeah, like Taysom Hill still. And then lastly, Colston Loveland maybe getting that post bye week rookie playing time bump himself here after coming off a short-term injury as well, Nate.
Oh yeah, it was good to see him get almost close to even with Cole Kmet in terms of playing time, and especially in passing situations. It was Loveland running more routes than Kmet this past week, so a huge difference from what we saw. Kmet was playing 90% of offensive snaps the first 5 weeks of the season. That dropped down to 50% this week, so a huge drop by Cole. Loveland took a lot of those snaps in his place. Loveland had more targets. So it's been pretty clear that Loveland's a better option in the passing game. We saw him get more involved this week than we had seen in the past. Still not playing enough to want to start him in fantasy starting lineups. Also not seeing enough targets yet to put him in fantasy starting lineups. But there's a reason he was the 10th overall pick in the draft. We've mentioned plenty of rookies so far today that you want him because of what he could do over the second half of the season. And similar to Luther Burden, we haven't had a clear second option emerge in this Bears passing offense, but this Bears passing offense is playing well enough to support a second fantasy option. So I hope someone emerges at some point, and I think there is a decent enough chance that could be Loveland.
Yeah, that would make sense. All right, that is our list for this week. Thank you to everybody who tuned in. Obviously, good luck attacking those waiver wires. Remember to stay active and locked in all season long, which you can do by checking out more work at pff.com, powered by the best data collection team in the multiverse here at PFF, the real heroes. So, Nate, let everybody know what you have going on this week at pff.com.
Sure. It's the same things that we've seen in the past week. We have the recap articles up on the website. We have the usage and production report up on the website, which is what I'm using a lot of the times when I'm writing my articles. So if you're thinking about picking up anyone else on the waiver wire and want more information on them, that's the place that I would look. Also have the waiver wire article up already. Also have rest of season rankings. So that should also help you with your roster moves, seeing who's ranked higher over the rest of the season. 5 to add, 5 to drop, 5 to buy low, 5 to sell high. We are getting close to both the NFL trade deadline, but we only have roughly a month or so left to make trades in our fantasy leagues before most leagues have those trade deadlines as well. So now's the time you want to be making moves, especially if you are in a good position to make the fantasy playoffs. It's good to start looking ahead to what the schedules look like over the rest of the season. Outside of that, we'll have my rankings for this upcoming week up in a couple of hours from now, or should be up when a lot of people are listening to this. We'll have dynasty rankings up tomorrow. We'll also have start sit the day after that, and then we'll do it all again next week when we have another doubleheader of Monday night games with one game at 10 p.m. Eastern. So sorry in advance when I'm slightly more tired doing this in a week now.
Yeah, there is a pretty good chance that I'll fall asleep during that game, but we'll find out in a week from now. But yeah, make sure to use the promo code PFF Fantasy Podcast 25 if you want to get access to all of that stuff that Nate just mentioned, plus so much more for 25% off a PFF Plus subscription. And that includes my IDP fantasy report that's out now, all the snap shares for all IDPs, including waiver targets on defense, and so much more. IDP rankings. We got the wide receiver man zone report coming out on Wednesday. The red zone report will be out on Friday. And you can get, again, access to all that with PFF Fantasy Podcast 25 for 25% off. I'll see everybody for IDP Start Sit on Thursday for the podcast. Good luck in week 7. And until next time, peace out.